Hello, my name is Scott Lane, and welcome to this Speaky webinar series. Today, we're going to be focused on the topic of CSOs, Chief Sustainability Officers, and in particular, we're going to be focused on how they can build strategies that work and across an entire business. Now, the CSO role is an area that we focus on significantly at Speaky, both in helping CSOs develop their roles, but also how to be strategic throughout the organization. What we find in our work is that many working in the sustainability field have come into this area from a variety of backgrounds, including myself. And that variety can sometimes create challenges for our roles as CSO. We need a broader skill set. We sometimes get caught in some of the operational parts of sustainability. We may not always have the opportunity to be as strategic as we might like. So today's webinar is going to be focused specifically on that topic. Now, for those of you who have not attended a Speaky webinar before, they are intended to be fast. They're intended to be quick, and they are intended to be a lot of information within a 30-minute period. As a result, we may not have time for questions. If you do have questions, however, please feel free to ask them in the chat function, and I will get back to you at the end of the session offline or on email. So feel free to ask the questions, but keep in mind, time is very short for these sessions, and we try and pack a lot in. So let's get started. So firstly, keep in mind that this is the first of a series of seminars and webinars that are based on this topic. We put together a guide for CSOs. The QR code is available on the screen now if you wish to take a quick snapshot. This document is what we've called the impact sphere, which is essentially an overview of what we believe is the CSO role. And it covers 24 different areas across the role of a sustainability officer. So have a look at this document. And as a result, this is the first of 3 webinars that we're focused on topics within that particular document. Now, we talk about being strategic and how CSOs can be strategic, and that really is the purpose of today's session. Now, of course, what does that actually mean to be strategic? The way I like to look at it is that we are a strategic partner to the business. In fact, our role is, frankly, to do sustainability strategy, but it's also the operational piece, and it's the 24 areas that we've discussed in our impact sphere. But a big piece about building strategies that work is being strategic. Now, that sounds like it's a motherhood statement, but what I think it does is it reminds us to sometimes stand up and look into the distance and try and force ourselves to be strategic. So the first thing I would say is thinking strategic means you need to be strategic. And that has a huge way of impacting the way that you will look at this role. And the rest of this webinar is going to give you the techniques on how to, in fact, be more strategic. Now, some of the things that we'll talk through this webinar is what I call the building blocks. They're things that I think you need to have in place in order to truly build strategies that work. Now, these building blocks, some of it you will already have in your organization, and some of them you will need to build. But throughout this webinar, I'll be referring back to some of these core areas or core skills that I think are absolutely key. And if you've got those core skills, then that will create the building block that you need to truly be strategic. So think of each of these as elements that need to come together to build a full picture. Now, I am going to go through this pretty quickly. And the reason that I'm going through quickly is because I think this is a very pivotal moment for sustainability officers, frankly. I think we're under pressure. I think things are moving very fast. And I really don't want to see people miss this opportunity, because I think if we miss this opportunity of being strategic and actually capitalizing on that strategy, then I think we have a danger of kind of missing the sustainability train. Right now, we know that we are under pressure in some markets around the world for sustainability practices and stakeholder engagement and even stakeholder capitalism. So, my comments throughout today are going to be really focused on capturing this opportunity now and really don't miss that train because I think now is the time to really be strategic and build those building blocks because they may not come around. This time may not come around again with the opportunity to do that. Now, one of the things about being strategic is if you want to be strategic to a business, obviously you need to know the business. But more than that, what I've described here are the value drivers of the business. Now, part of a good corporate governance structure within a company does a couple of things. It sets the strategy of the company, but it also generates that value driver. So, what are the drivers of this business? The true things that generate value in this business. And I like to talk about value drivers in a business because that's frankly what the business is there for. It is there to drive value. Now, we can define value in different ways, and that may not be just shareholder value, but understanding those value drivers is actually pretty key. And so when I talk to people about understanding the business, what I'm really saying is understanding the value drivers of the business. And that's an important distinction. People can understand their business, they know how it works, they know the products they sell, etc. But the value that drives this business is something entirely different. So I would encourage everyone to really step back and think through what are the value drivers in this business. And that will be at a board level where that is identified. But that's a really key ingredient for you to really understand that value driver. And again, it's different to understanding the business. That kind of goes without saying. This is about what the value drivers are. Now, I also believe that in order to be a strategic leader when it comes to being a CSO and building strategies that really work, I think we need to really know our stuff. And I think we need to know a lot more about what's happening in the sustainability fields. And I've talked in webinars before about extending that knowledge set and to be true thought leaders in the space. And I truly believe that. I think this area is a fascinating area. There are enormous amounts of knowledge to gain. And I really encourage people to do that. I think practice it, study it, teach, write, be a really thought leader and really study uh, significant amounts about sustainability. And that's not just reading LinkedIn, but that's really studying this area. I think that's what it's going to take to be really strategic here, because a lot of the things that you'll be thinking through when you're building strategies that work are not going to be the obvious ones. They're not going to be the things that everyone else is doing. They're going to be truly innovative. And that's going to require you to tap into a little knowledge about a lot of areas. So I really do encourage myself, my team, and everyone that I work with to be very much a thought leader and to really study and practice what we preach. So again, a building block, building your own self-awareness, your self understanding of areas and being that true leader. Now, another building block, which is absolutely essential, is working with the board. And the board is technically there to set governance. They're technically there to set the structure of the business, the guidelines, the rules in which we operate, the integrity programs, and the programs that we have around value and purpose, and how do we operate the value drivers of the business in order to obtain our objectives. And so there's a good place to start when it comes to sustainability. I was chatting to someone yesterday about this particular topic, and they worked for a hotel group and they had been instructed by management to focus on ESG. And so they had gone off and they had focused on essentially energy and carbon. And they said they were going to reduce energy by being more energy efficient, turning off lights, etc., trying to institute some issues in the company around, in their words, ESG. Now, every single one of those things was cost reductions, frankly. It was there to save costs, reduce energy use, and to reduce emissions. But really, what it wasn't focused on is that value driver of that business, which is the hotel. It's there to attract customers and build a brand. And so there was a disconnect. And so the message was the board doesn't really understand this if their role is to drive cost reductions. So going back to that board and really getting them to understand sustainability and how it fits into that strategy of the company is pretty key. So it's starting at the board as another building block that just has to be in place. Now, I talk about building an investment strategy. So what does that actually mean? One of the interesting things about sustainability is that, amongst many, is that when we're looking at sustainable areas and we're really thinking about how do we build strategies that work, frankly, most sustainable strategies are not going to be net positive. The NPV will not be positive. And we know that because we know that in most situations, that concept of additionality comes in where, but for this additional funding or this additional grant or this additional initiative, we would not undertake this particular sustainability strategy because it's not NPV positive. So as we're building sustainability strategies, we need to be thinking about NPV calculations. We need to be thinking about NPV positive, which is something that we should just be doing anyway, because that's just obvious, leaving money on the table. But for those that are NPV negative, how do we get them up to at least zero? Now, building that investment strategy is going to be key because what you're really thinking about is where does the company and the board value that difference? Are they prepared to invest to get that project or to get that initiative up to NPV neutral or at least or perhaps positive? Building that investment strategy and thinking about it that way is really a skill set. It's sort of real key. So when we're thinking about initiatives that we're driving, remember about these NPV calculations and how we work them, because that is going to be the secret sauce that's going to get you successful. And that's it's going to take to building strategies that work. Now, apropos that is aligning with our stakeholders. Now, we've all heard that stakeholders are important, and they are. And in sustainability, they're even more important than others. But to build a strategy that works is going to need a strategy around these stakeholders. How do you engage them? How do you work with them? And how do you connect with them? Now, I use the word engage because that is really what it's after. It's engaging. It's not seeking feedback. It's not sending them a questionnaire. It's not asking them their thoughts. It's more than that. And this stakeholder piece is actually really important. And I've seen this done pretty well in companies, but I've seen it done really poorly. And I've seen stakeholder engagement done for the hell of it because it's something they think they have to do or they're told they do, but actually it's just not done well. So I think if you really want to be strategic, you want to build a strategy that works, this stakeholder piece is absolutely important to nail, and it really needs to be done properly. So invest more time in that stakeholder piece. Now, if we're really truly going to develop a sustainability strategy and something that's going to work, then we need to think through how we develop culture across an organization. I was chatting to someone today, in fact, that was looking at building or implementing some systems around the way in which sustainability is seen in the company and creating sort of a gamify initiative with employee engagement and with suppliers and really trying to create this kind of competitive environment almost for suggesting sustainability issues and giving out awards and giving out kind of employee incentives to try and drive initiatives and drive behavioral change and to really get people focused. And I thought it was a fantastic idea. So, thinking about how do we drive this change through the organization to thinking about sustainability and how we educate and build that culture, I think that's absolutely key. So if we're going to build strategies that work for CSOs, we've got to tackle this we've got to tackle this sustainability culture. Now, as we've seen throughout probably the last 6 to 12 months, that can be quite challenging, frankly. On some days, I feel 40, 50, 60% of the world or the people I talk to may not be on my side. They think that some of these things are overblown. They think that climate change isn't real. I was chatting to someone recently who was a professor at a very well-known university who essentially said the world's been in the best place that it's ever been. And this is someone that I significantly admire in the technology area and thought, wow, he's a very intelligent person who has a very different view. Now, rather than get angry or get frustrated with that, our job is to work out how do we bring this person across the line? How do we educate? How do we encourage? And how do we incentivize different behaviors which will ultimately lead to cultures. So one of the things that I think is going to make us really successful as CSOs is recognizing those people who exist and how we're going to move them across to our side. And that's a mixture of incentives, disincentives, behavioral change, driving cultural change. So a lot of work to be done on this culture piece in order to really drive this different behavior. We also know that partners are things that are really required in this space. So if we're going to build strategies at work, we've got to build strategies with partners. The dialogue I just had with a hotel group, my question to them was, what other hotel groups have you been talking with? What other industry coalitions have you been working with? What other opportunities have you had to sit down with some of your peers and talk about some of these initiatives? And the answer was they hadn't done any of that. They hadn't connected. They saw it as kind of weirdly competitive, and it was just not in their nature to do that. And I think in the sustainability area, as we know from SDG 17, there is an expectation that we partner. And I think if you're going to build strategies that work, it's going to be this network effect, which has to involve partners. And so whether it's a competitor, whether it's a partner, whether it is someone on the supply chain, but I think there's a real opportunity here to build that network effect. And frankly, we need that because we may not have time otherwise to bring these technologies at force. So I've seen companies, really leverage new technologies and then frankly make it open to other competitors, make it available, open source initiatives. And I think that we need more of that. So while it is a competitive advantage to be sustainable, we don't want to do that at the loss of everyone else, because that's not going to make the world more sustainable either. So it's a balance in making this happen. And that really leads to innovation. Now, innovation is something that is more than just inventing things. Inventing new ideas or creating something new is not innovation. That might be an invention, but it may not be innovative. What makes it really innovative is scaling it and being able to scale that to a level that's appropriate for your organization or your industry. I think innovation is going to be key here. So when I talk to CSOs in our own business, we're constantly thinking about what is that innovative idea that's going to change this? What is the thing that we can create? Or what is the packaging that we need to have? Or what is the unique way that we can perhaps position our fleet or use different routes to try and reduce our use of fuel? Being innovative may not necessarily be creating the next, great invention, but it's about thinking differently and really using that creative power of a group think to really drive different behaviors. So I think innovation is what's going to be key here. Now, of course, that takes time and it takes some skills, but there are some fantastic programs around innovation that CSO should take to try and drive that innovative streak within you and your teams. But innovation is key. So if I was a CSO, I'd be teaching teams about being innovative and how to drive that culture in my organization. I use the example before of a board that is a bit disconnected. And I think if we are going to be successful in building strategies, not only do we need to be innovative and we need to build the right culture, but we kind of need agreement to a charter. By that, I mean, we need not only the board to be involved, but we need more than that. We need a charter. We need a commitment. We need accountability. We need oversight. And so I often talk to companies who say, our board is very heavily involved in this topic. Our board is really engaged. Our board does this, our board does that. And then I talk to them about their role and how they're going. And they'll say they've got no budgets, no support. It's really tough. They can't get headcount. They're trying to nickel and dime on technology. They can't afford to go to conferences. And I stop and think, well, I'm confused now because on the one hand, you had what appeared to be direction, support, mandate, something from the board, but your direct manager isn't giving you that support. So something broke between the board, the CEO, executive and management and you. Something broke along that process. Now, was it because it was never there in the first place, because we didn't have a clear charter, and or the delegation, or we had a clear charter, but the delegation to the executive team broke? I'm not quite sure, but I think start off with that board and that charter. And that's a really important piece to have, because it is something that you can leverage when times are tough, as the CSO was experiencing. I think if we're going to be successful in this whole world of CSO and our role, and we're building strategies that work, we kind of need to address this issue of the enterprise risk management and the way in which sustainability works. Sustainability, as we know, works with impacts, risks, and opportunities. And the big difference there to a classic ERM is this word called impact and opportunities. And the current thinking is very much focused on risks and ERMs, and our world is thinking about impacts and opportunities, quite different things to risks. So I think if we're going to be successful in these roles and in business, we need to work out how to get our ERM either expanded in scope, or changed, or modified, or upskilled, or up-leveled, so that it can start thinking more about some of the impacts, risk, and opportunities, and then thinking about how that plays into materiality, which plays into disclosures. So this whole area is one which is kind of disjointed right now, and it's pretty, frankly, it's more than that. It's totally disconnected. And I think this is an area where we can really add a lot of value. And I think we can get a lot of groupthink involved here to really change the way we think about risk and how we get that into impacts and opportunities. And I think that's a real opportunity for us as CSOs. Fix CSR. It's the corporate social responsibility is something that, we've had for a lot of time, and a lot of organizations still kind of do it. They still do foundations, they still do charitable donations, they still have groups connected with communities. But what I observe is that it is kind of stuck in 1990 land, and it's still operating, but kind of in this vacuum, but not quite connected to broader ESG initiatives and sustainability and values. And so the area of CSR is an area which I think is a huge opportunity to kind of lift up and bring back to life, and build that back into the ESG and sustainability strategies. It's an area that I see is kind of left out on a limb right now, and I think there's huge value in bringing it back in and managing it properly, and up leveling it. So I think fixed CSR is one of the other strategies that I'd probably look at. As an assurance company and a software company ourselves, I probably have somewhat of an invested interest here, but I think assurance is a pretty important piece, and assurance is going to be even more important going forward. It is totally inappropriate to release public information in the form of disclosures, or in the form of even a sustainability report, that has not been independently audited. I think that is a dangerous step. I think that is verging on, unconscionable to do that. I think it is not wise, frankly. So whether it's required or not, I think companies really need to think through this assurance strategy. And when I talk to audit committees and boards, they agree, but I think they're still caught in financial reporting world and haven't quite connected all this yet. So I think integrating assurance is a huge opportunity for us to be really strategic, and to think about assurance across the board. As many of you know, we do a lot of ISO assurance, and the certification world is disconnected from the board and disconnected from the audit committee, but it shouldn't be. I mean, it's part of the assurance world within the company, and it's all part of the same oversight. So connecting these things is pretty important, and I think at the moment they're a bit disconnected. So building that assurance strategy for the business as a whole, which includes sustainability and ESG issues, and includes other areas like information security or privacy, for example. I think that is where we have great opportunity. So if we're going to build a strategy that works, we kind of need to keep in this assurance piece engaged, and to really put that front and center, because that drives the oversight, and that drives the accountability, and that comes back to where the board started in the first place. So if we don't complete the loop, and that we don't go from board building strategy, passing it to management, delegating it to management executing on it, and that we don't have that feedback, independence, assurance, oversight, and ultimately improvement loop back to the board, then we're kind of missing that piece. And it's quite reasonable for the board to not feel comfortable, or for us not feel comfortable giving information to the board unless we've got this assurance loop right. So there's a reason why it's there, and I think companies need to really prioritize this a lot more. Technology is something that we can't ignore now. No matter how much we want to put our head in the sand, technology is there. It exists. AI, generative AI, agentic, all these fantastic things are coming. We're doing a lot of work at Speaki on this, but there's a lot of tech out there now. And so there's absolutely no excuse not to be on the tech roadmap. And so whether that's a big step or a small step, getting on that tech roadmap is something. Most of these solutions are not expensive, particularly when you compare it to what the business pays on things. So this is minuscule amounts. So I would encourage everyone to really get onto this tech piece, because there's a lot happening in the sustainability area. Now, we touched on this right at the start, but I want to say it one more time. It's about value. And we've got to really work out how to build value and how to measure value. And when I talk about value, I'm not talking about value from cost savings or value to the planet and reducing emissions, for example. Actually, what I'm really talking about is the value to the financial performance of the business. And I had this question that I posed during the week to someone, which was, if we just stopped ESG and sustainability tomorrow, we just canceled everything, we stopped it, we sacked everybody, we stopped the funding, we literally stopped everything tomorrow. Fast forward 6 months and tell me, what impact has the business had financially? If the answer is it's had no impact financially, then maybe our sustainability initiatives weren't doing much in the first place. So it's a good perspective to stand back and think, well, if we just stopped everything, what would happen? If the answer is wouldn't make much impact, well, I think we have a problem because we're not really valuing sustainability in the first place. 2 or 3 things to finish on. I think we really need to think about telling our story. We've done a lot of that work, and I think companies are still struggling with how to do this. I think ESG reporting is obviously here to stay. ESG disclosures are here to stay, albeit maybe turned up, turned down, but they're here to stay. So working out how we do that, I think is pretty important. Right now, it's very reactionary, and I think we need to get beyond that and get to a stage where it's a little bit less reactionary and a little bit more strategic. But I think fixing this is a really key initiative, but it's something that needs the time invested in it. I was also reminded recently that the planet has been orbiting the sun for 1 billion years, and it's pretty much likely to orbit the sun for another 1 billion years. So we don't necessarily worry about the future of the planet. What we need to worry about is the future of the people. And I raise that point because I think it's a really good reminder for all of us that when we talk to people about saving the planet, actually what we're really saying is we're saving our role and our space as humans and living on this planet. We're not talking about the planet's life itself. It's going to continue, albeit in a slightly different form, but it will continue to orbit the sun like it has been. But the way in which people live on the planet is the issue. I think that humanizing change is really important. So I think when we're building our strategies, I think we need to remember the people, because we're not necessarily always thinking about the planet. I think we've got to think about the people on the planet. And so the people are what's going to be impacted. The planet will continue to circle the sun, but the people on the planet are the ones that are suffering. And I think that reminder to humanize some of these issues will make our strategies far stickier. Finally, there's a lot of information that's here. And as you have a think through what we've covered today and what we will cover in our next 2 webinars that follow on from this topic, have a read of the the impact sphere that we made available at the start, because I think that will help you look more broadly at the 24 or so roles that we have in CSO land and think about how do we do that. Again, as a reminder, we do have a session in 2 weeks' time, and we have another session in another 2 weeks' time. So I encourage you to dial into those sessions. They're an extension of this session. The next one, we start talking a little bit more about reporting and disclosures, and then we start talking about engagement. And so they're key building blocks within the CSO strategy that we're building. So I encourage you to get involved and to sign up for those. Finally, we are going to wrap up with a poll that we are going to launch. So the team is going to offer the poll. So in the app on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, you will see a poll button. If you click on that poll and give a quick answer, that would be most appreciated to the team so that we can collect some of your input and do some follow-up. While you're doing that, thank you very much for listening to this edition of the Speaki webinar series on the CSO and being strategic. I look forward to seeing you at successive editions of the Speaki webinar, in particular, the next two that will be an extension of the CSO program. So for me, Scott Lane, thank you for listening to this Speaki webinar and look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.